Toys explain the literacy research, or how phonics got framed. There are two main schools of thought about how people learn to read and spell, usually called whole language and phonics. Whole language is based on the idea that learning to read and spell is a natural developmental process, like walking and talking, and that if you read to children every day and generally bathe them in written language, they'll naturally pick it up and be able to read and spell without being directly taught. Phonics, on the other hand, sees literacy as a complex learnt skill to be broken down and taught systematically. Phonics is as old as the hills, but whole language dates back to the 1960s and 70s, when our educational establishment and those around the English-speaking world decided that reading was natural. Because phonics was old, it got associated with other ideas that were also old, like caning children and making them do lots of pointless marching. These were lumped together as old-fashioned, teacher-centred, reactionary teaching methods. Teachers in the 1960s and 70s were keen to be modern, child-centred and progressive. So when phonics was framed as old-fashioned and reactionary, it was thrown out. So anyone who's qualified to be a teacher since the 1970s, and that's just about every teacher, probably wasn't taught much about phonics in their training. In fact, many teachers have been told at uni and by other influential people not to teach using phonics. Few school libraries contain these sorts of readers, which allow children to practice reading simple spelling patterns and gradually add more and more difficult ones till they're ready to tackle regular books independently. However, over time, most teachers recognise that there is value in phonics. So for years, most have been doing what gets called balanced literacy, meaning it's based on both whole language and phonics. This is supposed to be the best of both worlds. The focus of teaching remains the whole word, and children are taught to memorise lists of very frequent words, but also to deduce the sounds of letters, usually by being shown groups of words starting with the same letter. Here's an example where the words all start with the letter E, but the beginning sounds are E as in eggs, A as in 8, O as in envelope, E as in eagle, ear as in ear, and I as in eye. That's 6 different beginning sounds in just 9 words. What many beginners learn from this sort of teaching is that the relationship between sounds and letters is at best complicated and at worst random. Because most controlled spelling readers have been thrown out, children have been encouraged to attempt to read books containing many words with very hard spellings. Not knowing how to sound them out, they've often been encouraged to use unreliable strategies like looking at first letters and word shapes, looking at pictures and guessing. Absolute beginners have also been encouraged to independently write in an open-ended, creative way before they could actually spell the necessary words. So they've practiced a lot of spelling mistakes. Okay, that's the educational backstory. Now let's see how well it's working for us as a society. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, about 17% of Australian adults can't really read or spell. Yep, I said 17%. About another 30, that's 30, not 13, of adults aren't literate enough to cope with all the reading and spelling expected in our complex modern society. Being able to fill in forms, read maps, use the internet, program the set-top box and so on. Poor literacy means fewer study and job options, poorer health and mental health, and more risk of unemployment and getting on the wrong side of the law. Now an international study has ranked Australian kids 27th out of 48 countries on reading, the lowest of any English-speaking country. About 25% of Australia's Year 4 students failed to meet the minimum standard in reading for their age. So in plain language, far too many Australians aren't learning the supposedly natural skills of reading and spelling very well. The scientific research on literacy has been telling us for some time how to fix this, but it seems we haven't been listening. For example, in a disadvantaged part of Scotland between 1997 and 2004, a big group of wee lads and lassies were taught literacy using a specific type of phonics called synthetic phonics, in which beginners start off with just a few sounds and letters, mix them together, see what words they can make, practice building and writing and reading those in a range of enjoyable activities, and then gradually add more sounds and more spellings and practice these until they've grasped all the main patterns of written English. On the national reading test at age 11, these little lassies and lads were 3 years ahead of the national average. Starting around the same time, a neighbouring shire that had high levels of disadvantage as well implemented a 10-year synthetic phonics program and got the number of students starting secondary school functionally illiterate down from 28% to 3. Not 3%, 3 students out of thousands. Other scientific research with proper control groups and data and statistics and so on, so we're not talking about the anecdote dressed up as evidence sort of research, all shows the same thing. Explicit, systematic, synthetic phonics with sounds and letters, not words, as a starting point, is go. It simply gets the best results. In 2005, the Australian Federal Government held an inquiry into the teaching of reading in Australia, and here's the report, which you can get off the internet. It made 20 recommendations, none of which have been implemented by successive governments or education departments in the years since its publication. Its first 2 recommendations were, firstly, that teachers get more training so that they can teach literacy in a more effective way, and secondly, that teachers, and I quote, provide systematic, direct and explicit phonics instruction so that children master the essential alphabetic code-breaking skills required for foundational reading proficiency. Our system for writing down words is a human invention like the bicycle, and reading and writing are no more innate and natural for humans than cycling. We don't say someone's dyscyclic if they haven't learnt to ride a bike by the usual age. So it's a little bit weird that we call people who haven't learnt to read and spell by the usual age dyslexic or dysgraphic. We all master some learnt skills more easily than others. For example, I have never really gotten the hang of ball sports. Some children will learn to read and spell quickly and easily, no matter how they're taught, but they are the minority. English spelling pretty much sucks because the English we speak today was created by mashing together the languages of the Anglo-Saxons, the Vikings and the Norman French, shifting all the vowels around and adding heaps of Latin and Greek words. Plus, for centuries, English speakers have been going around pinching words from just about every other language. We're also continually making up new words for new things, like Pokemon, Quidditch, emos, burkinis and glamping. Plus, we use the Latin alphabet, so we've only got 26 letters to represent 44 sounds. This means we've ended up with every sound having more than one spelling, some spellings being shared by several sounds, and some words, including very frequently used words, containing very unusual sound-letter relationships indeed. When children try to apply these patterns to other words, they can end up a very long way up the creek without a paddle. We can't change the English spelling system now because 1 billion people are using it, and anyway, who'd make that decision? The Queen doesn't have the authority anymore, and the United Nations is kind of busy with wars and climate change and so on. So we just have to suck it up and teach it well so everyone can learn it. Most people struggling to learn literacy have difficulties in one or both of the following areas. Firstly, poor phonemic awareness, which is the ability to hear the identity, number and order of sounds in words, so that you know there are 4 sounds in the word stick and 5 in plant, and you know what they are, and you can hear the difference between lost and lots, and between council and cancel. The second very common problem is poor spelling pattern knowledge. Lots of people know one sound for each of the 26 letters and not much more, whereas there are 44 sounds and more than 100 important spellings in English, many of them used for more than one sound, plus lots more spellings that only occur in a few words. We'll get this guy to help out here because he's nice and bald. Human brains have 2 sides, and in very general terms, if you'll excuse this major oversimplification, the left side is more concerned with processing language and the right side is more concerned with processing pictures. Unless they're taught not to, many beginning readers make the mistake of trying to process written words like they process pictures on the right sides of their brains, instead of processing them as language on the left. This can seem to be working for a while, but about grade 2, these learners hit the wall. because they've run out of visual memory for abstract symbols, and they can't go any further unless they're taught to process written words as sequences of spellings or graphemes that represent speech sounds or phonemes on the left sides of their brains. Once you can sound out words, you can start building up a bank of known written words in another part of your left brain. Roughly speaking, it's the system you use to work out whether a written word looks right or not. These two systems, sounding words out and recognising them, then work together in a cascading checks and balances kind of way to produce skilled reading and spelling. You do not get the left-sided word bank system operating properly without the sounding out one. These days, hundreds of children who haven't learnt to read and spell at school are referred to speech pathologists like me for help. If they don't have access to a publicly funded therapist through their school, private therapy typically costs their parents $100 a week. Too bad for the kids whose parents don't have the money. Meanwhile, our wealthiest private schools are wising up to the research on synthetic phonics. At Melbourne's Wesley College, all the preps do a program called Jolly Phonics, just like the little Scottish kids I mentioned earlier, because it works and it gives them the best possible start. Do we really want the gap between the haves and have-nots to widen even further because of an ideological argument among educational academics decades ago? We have to look at the evidence and get over it. A literacy teaching methodology is only progressive if it works. And if it's leaving a whole lot of people unable to read and spell, then that's my idea of reactionary. I can make a living out of treating these symptoms, but it would be unethical to not also talk about the cause. Anyway, I want to live in a prosperous and illiterate society, not one where a fifth of people are left behind. It's much better to learn literacy skills when you're little. So if your young child is being taught at school via systematic, explicit synthetic phonics, you're very lucky. So please take the time to thank your child's teacher and the school principal for teaching in an evidence-based way. If, on the other hand, your child is being taught to memorise lists of sight or magic words or read by looking at pictures, first letters or guessing or anything other than sounding out, you've got two options. One is to teach them synthetic phonics at home, but don't go looking for suitable resources in mainstream educational bookshops or libraries because you won't find much. Have a look at my website, www.spellforbet.com.au, for ideas, or just Google synthetic phonics. The other thing you can do is take the National Inquiry into the Teaching of Literacy report down to your child's school and discuss it with the teachers and ask them to modify their literacy teaching methods in the light of its evidence and recommendations. I know from more than 20 years of working in schools that teachers want to teach kids the best way possible, and if it comes down to a clash between poorly substantiated dogma and the scientific evidence about their students' best interests, the dogma will go straight in the bin every time. If you know someone with normal intelligence who can't really read or spell because they didn't learn when they were little, whether they're an older child, a teenager or an adult, they can almost certainly still learn. They need a good assessment first, either at school through Spelled, or since illiteracy is a major threat to your health, their GP might be able to provide a Medicare referral to a specialist speech pathologist or psychologist. Or anyone can self-refer, and many private health funds will provide a rebate. If the assessment shows the problem is poor phonemic awareness and or poor spelling pattern knowledge, they'll need about 60 hours of solid, well-organised work on a good synthetic phonics program to get moving on literacy from wherever it was they conked out. This should be overseen by an expert, but done day to day with the support of a family member, a friend, an aide or a volunteer. There are a lot of good resources available. Again, see my website for more information. This work needs to be done fairly intensively. You're not going to learn to ride a bike well if you only practice 10 minutes a week, and the same goes for literacy practice. But if you do about an hour a day, 5 days a week, it only takes you 3 months to rack up 60 hours. Stories consistent with the evidence that we can do a lot better at literacy come from every walk of life. Tasmanian MP Dick Adams, who learnt to read and write at age 25. Children whose parents taught them to read before they went to school by demonstrating sounds and letters. And Martin Gregory, my partner's dad, who was a primary teacher in the 60s and 70s, carried on with his old-fashioned, systematic and thorough teaching methods when the rest of his profession threw phonics out the window. The high school teachers in the area said they could pick the kids he'd taught because they could all read, spell, do sums and say their times tables. It takes guts to swim against the mainstream, but the people with guts are the ones who make a difference.